The light slanted low through the rafters of the Fair Creek livestock barn, painting gold across the dust like the past, trying to crawl back into the present. In the center of the arena, a man stood still as stone, arms raised, eyes fixed forward, like he was about to summon something he couldn't control. Beside him, the earth trembled under the hooves of a beast too wild for the world that made him. The late afternoon sun bled through the slats of the old livestock barn, casting long streaks of shadow across the sawdust-covered floor. Harlan Voss stood in the center of it all, boots planted, arms lifted like a preacher mid-sermon. His silver belt buckle caught the light, but it was the lines on his face that told the story. He wasn't here to sell, he was here to dare. Next to him stood a massive quarter-horse stallion, all rippling chestnut muscle and a white blaze that slashed down his face like a warning. Ashfall. That was the name whispered around fire pits and over whiskey in this part of the county, a name wrapped in dust, blood, and broken bones. "He's not a horse," Harlan rasped, his voice rough as rusted iron. "He's a storm wrapped in hide, and if any of you think you've got 10 seconds of guts in you, he's yours." The crowd shifted. Nervous chuckles rolled through the stands like loose gravel on a canyon edge. They remembered last spring, the screams, the cowboy who limped for weeks, the one who didn't walk again right. Ashfall didn't buck, he punished. And no one dared ask why he'd turned mean. They just stopped asking altogether. Then, from the edge of the arena, the silence broke, not with noise, but movement. A woman stepped forward, boots tapping through the dust. Tan chaps, a cream button-down pressed neat under a leather belt, a turquoise scarf tied at her throat like a piece of someone long gone. The barn held its breath. No one knew her name, but when her eyes met Ashfall's, even the dust seemed to pause midair. She didn't stop walking. Harlan's hand twitched at his side. "Girl," he warned, voice low and tight. "This ain't no stunt show. That horse will end you." But she didn't look at him. "Della Ray Winslow," she said, steady. Her gaze never left Ashfall. "And I'm not here for show. I came to remember." From the gallery, Boone Sutter muttered a curse. Lyle Deacon raised one brow but said nothing. Merle Thatcher, arms folded like old wire, just stared. They all thought she didn't stand a damn chance. Ashfall pawed the ground again, flinging sand into the air. Della didn't blink. She stepped closer, slow and sure, as if the very air between them was sacred ground. She raised her hand, palm open. Time faltered, the stallion's ears flicked. His breath surged through flared nostrils, but he didn't rear. He didn't bolt. He stepped forward. Harlan's breath caught. Not from fear, from recognition. The kind that lives under your ribs and aches like an old wound reopening. Ashfall stood still now, just inches from the woman whose name no one had known minutes before. Her hand met his neck, light, certain. His skin twitched under her fingers, not in rejection, but memory. The barn was dead silent, but the silence was thick, charged like the air before lightning strikes. Boone stepped forward, saddle in hand, voice low. "She's going to die," he muttered to Harlan. "You want that on your hands?" But Harlan said nothing. His arms were crossed, jaw locked tight. Only his eyes moved, following Della's every step, not like a man judging her, like a man seeing something he thought was lost forever. She lifted the saddle onto Ashfall's back. No resistance, no lurch, no snarl. A few mouths dropped open in the stands. Even Merle Thatcher leaned forward, the disbelief cracking the years on his face. "She ain't just bluffing her way through," Lyle whispered. "She knows that horse." When Della mounted, Ashfall danced beneath her. The crowd's breath caught, then he reared. High, sharp, furious. Testing her. Testing fate. Harlan's hand flinched toward the rail, but she didn't fall. She didn't even waver. Her boots held firm in the stirrups. Her back was straight. One hand rested gently on the reins. She whispered something, too soft for anyone to hear, and Ashfall stilled, not in surrender, in recognition. Harlan turned his face, just slightly, like something in him had split. Not the man, the past. Boone saw it first. "You knew," he whispered. "You knew this was possible, didn't you?" Harlan didn't answer, couldn't. The truth had just stepped back into his life in boots, denim, and a turquoise scarf, and he wasn't ready for what came next. Ashfall's hooves beat a steady rhythm across the arena floor, not wild or rebellious, but measured, almost thoughtful. Beneath Della Ray's calm grip, he moved like he remembered who he used to be, or more hauntingly, who he used to belong to. The crowd, once stirred by spectacle, now sat locked in a silence, thick with disbelief. Not a soul dared speak. Harlan Voss hadn't moved from his place near the rail. But something in his body, in the way his arms no longer crossed quite so tightly, in the way his shoulders dipped with the weight of history, had shifted. Merle Thatcher stepped forward first, his voice low and tight. "You need to stop this," he said. Not loud, but enough for Harlan to hear. "This isn't a show anymore. That girl, she knows that horse, really knows him." Harlan didn't reply. His eyes didn't leave Della, but the fire behind his stare had changed. It wasn't awe, it wasn't even fear. It was recognition and dread. He wasn't watching a stranger soothe a savage beast. He was watching the return of a ghost. Della slowed Ashfall to a walk. Her hand rested gently against his shoulder. She leaned forward, whispering again. Her words weren't meant for anyone else, only him. And whatever she said, the stallion responded, exhaling in a long, heavy breath, like something ancient was loosening its grip on him. It wasn't dominance. It was trust. And trust like that doesn't come from training. It comes from memory. Inside Harlan's chest, memories he'd buried beneath work, pride, and decades of silence began clawing their way out. She had her mother's eyes, the way she held herself in the saddle, straight-backed, confident, fearless. It was all Elise Ray, and that truth struck him. And Della, she wasn't done. She brought Ashfall to a stop in front of the man who hadn't stepped forward since she entered the arena. Her posture stayed tall in the saddle, but her voice, when it came, cut deeper than any shout. "You can keep pretending I'm just a rider," she said, voice even but laced with fire. "But you and I both know the truth. I didn't come here to win a horse." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze fixed on Harlan like a knife, pressed gently into old flesh. "I came to confront the man who left my mother behind." The barn cracked open under the weight of that moment. Even Ashfall stood still, like he understood what had been said, like he was part of it too. Harlan Voss didn't blink, but the muscle in his jaw twitched so hard it looked like it might snap. The crowd was stunned. What had begun as a dare, a spectacle, had turned into something far older, far messier. A reckoning born from silence and shame. Boone Sutter took a single step back. He ran a hand through his beard, exhaling sharp through his nose. He looked toward Merle and Lyle, both of whom had gone still. "This ain't just horsemanship," Boone murmured. "This is blood." Merle's eyes narrowed. "Harlan," he said slowly, "is that girl saying what I think she's saying?" The old auctioneer's voice came out brittle, like gravel that had lost its weight. "She's confused," he muttered. "She don't know what she's talking about." But everyone knew it wasn't true. Not anymore. Della dismounted. The sound of her boots in the dust was louder than the breath of the crowd. Ashfall didn't follow her. He stayed where she left him, eyes wide, watching both of them like a child caught between estranged parents. "I know exactly what I'm talking about," she said, louder now. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't break. "You left her, my mama Elise Ray. You think she never told me. You think I wouldn't find my way back. You think Ashfall wouldn't remember me." The stallion snorted, loud and sharp, as if to answer. And that's when the truth finally reached Harlan in full. Not with a whisper, with a crash. He had known, from the first moment she stepped into the arena, from the way she touched the horse, from the way she carried that turquoise scarf, like it meant something more than fashion. He had known. "She told me everything," Della continued. "How you met her here, how you swore to build a life, how you disappeared when she needed you most. I grew up hearing your name like it was both a curse and a legend." Her voice cracked, just slightly, and the crowd behind her shifted, but no one spoke. For the first time in years, Harlan lowered his hat, not in greeting, in shame. His voice barely escaped his throat. "I didn't know about you, not for sure. And when I finally did, it was too late to fix." Della's face didn't change. Her body held still, but her voice landed like a hammer. "It's not about fixing it, Harlan. It's about finally saying it out loud." And just like that, the man who once silenced entire barns with a single look seemed small. Not weak, but tired. Tired of carrying something that had grown heavier every year he kept it buried. He looked up at her, really looked. And he saw not just Elise's daughter, but his own. Her jaw, her fire, her presence. The guilt bloomed like smoke behind his eyes. "I was a coward," he said finally. "When your mama told me she was pregnant, I panicked. Told her I needed time. Then I ran. I told myself I was protecting her. Truth is, I was protecting myself." Ashfall let out a low, almost mournful whinny, as if he too had carried something unspoken for far too long. Della stepped back. Her voice tightened. You don't get to erase what you did, but you can start by not pretending I don't exist. Harlan nodded. Just once, but that small motion carried the weight of decades. And then she turned her back on him. Not out of hate, but something deeper. She walked back to Ashfall, her shoulders square, her pace sure. Inside her, something cracked, not broken, just released. Della Ray stood beside Ashfall, her hand resting lightly against his neck. His breath was steady now, slow, almost reverent, as if he could sense that whatever storm had been brewing wasn't aimed at him anymore. Behind her, Harlan Voss still hadn't moved, and in the silence, the air inside the barn felt like it had thickened with memory. Every board, every rafter, every breath carried the weight of a past too long ignored. Ashfall nudged Della's shoulder gently, like he did when he was a colt. The motion unlocked something in her, not anger, not yet forgiveness, but release. A kind of exhausted truth, raw and heavy as grief. We did what we came to do, didn't we, boy? She whispered, her voice barely a breath. Ashfall flicked an ear toward her. The two of them stood there for a long moment, girl and horse, past and present, bound by something more than blood or training. Across the barn, Boone Sutter quietly stepped toward the side gate. He didn't say anything, just gave them space. Merle Thatcher and Lyle Deacon didn't follow. They lingered, eyes uncertain, caught between the pull of old loyalties and the ache of something new, the shifting of a legacy. Harlan still hadn't spoken again, but he watched the way Ashfall leaned into Della's touch, watched the steadiness in her presence, watched the way she'd taken everything he'd abandoned and stood taller because of it. Then, finally, Della turned back to him. Her boots crunched softly through the dirt, but her voice was anything but soft. I didn't come here for closure, she said. I came to see if you'd deny me to my face. She paused. You didn't. That in itself was something. Her voice cracked slightly at the end, and she hated that. Hated giving him even a flicker of emotion. Vulnerability was something men like Harlan Voss took, and never gave back. But maybe this wasn't about strength anymore. Harlan took one step forward, then another. He removed his hat, slowly, like a man walking into a funeral he didn't know how to grieve. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. Hell, I don't deserve it. His voice was low and raw, like gravel after rain. He wasn't trying to defend himself now, just trying to speak plainly. But if you ever want answers, if you ever want to ask me why I ran, I'll be here. He gestured toward the barn, then to the land beyond the fence. This place, it's yours, if you want it. The barn, the land, him. He nodded toward Ashfall. He was meant to be yours from the start. I just didn't have the guts to see it. Della stared at him, and for the first time, her gaze didn't burn. It studied, it searched, and it found not absolution, but recognition. Maybe the kind of man who runs can be the kind of man who one day stops. She gave a single nod. I'm not ready to talk, she said. But I'm not leaving town either. Ashfall let out a deep breath, a sound so low and grounded it felt like closure wrapped in breath, or maybe the beginning of something neither of them could name yet. And for the first time that day, Harlan Voss turned and walked away, not like the proud auctioneer who once silenced crowds, but like a man finally tired of hiding from his own truth. By morning, the story had already traveled beyond the fence lines of Fair Creek. In towns like this, secrets don't die. They just go quiet for a while. But after what happened in that barn, the silence had shattered. When Della tried to saddle Ashfall outside Boone's stable, she felt it. Eyes watching, some with sympathy, some with judgment, a few with something colder, resentment, maybe. Harlan Voss had been a fixture in this place, and not everyone was ready to see him for who he really was. She brushed Ashfall's coat in long, practiced strokes, just like she had when he was still a lanky colt. Her voice was barely above a whisper. You're still the only one that listens without asking questions, she said. Ashfall flicked his ears back toward her. His tail swished lazily. He understood. Inside the barn, the quiet felt different, cleaner somehow, stripped of pretense. The door creaked. Della turned, expecting Boone or a stable hand. But it was Irene Kavanaugh, town gossip, historian, and unapologetic firestarter. She leaned on her cane, but her posture still cut through a room like a whip crack. You ride that horse like your mother used to, Irene said. Elise, she had a way of making creatures feel safe. So do you. Della stiffened. She wasn't expecting kindness, least of all from Irene Kavanaugh, but Irene's voice wasn't sharp this time. It was tired. Human. People around here, they're slow to change their minds. But don't let that fool you, she said. They're watching because they care, even if they don't know it yet. Della didn't respond. Not right away. Why are you telling me this? She asked finally. Irene sighed. A long breath from somewhere deep in the ribs. Because when your mother walked into town pregnant and alone, I didn't stand up for her. And I've regretted it for 22 years. Della didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. The sun dipped low behind the hills that wrapped around Fair Creek, casting everything in a soft amber hush. At the edge of the pasture, Harlan Voss sat on his porch like a man waiting for a verdict. Boone stood beside him, holding 2 mugs of black coffee. You think she'll come talk to you? Boone asked. Harlan didn't respond right away. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, where ashfall grazed, calm, quiet, changed. I think she already said everything she needed to, Harlan said finally. Now it's my turn to prove I heard it. And beneath that fading sky, Fair Creek seemed to hold its breath, unsure if this was a beginning, or simply the dust settling after a long, bitter storm. The week passed slowly. Della Ray stayed on the outskirts of town, boarding ashfall at Boone's stable and sleeping in the room above the old tack shop. She avoided Main Street. She avoided the cafe where voices dropped to whispers when she walked by. Most of all, she avoided the Voss Ranch, though every evening, she caught herself staring at the porch light flickering in the distance. But something had begun to shift. Ashfall had changed. He no longer pulled away at the halter or braced against the lead. He followed her now, ears flicked forward whenever she spoke, eyes soft with recognition. He walked like the fear had loosened from his body, like he remembered how to trust. One morning, as she sat on the fence watching him graze, Boone approached quietly. He handed her a small envelope. He left this for you, he said, nodding toward the ranch beyond the hills. Della opened it slowly, half expecting a letter or another apology she didn't want. Inside was a deed, the Voss Ranch. In her name, she blinked. Is this a joke? Boone shook his head. He's serious. Said it belonged to your blood, not just his name. Told me to give it to you whenever you looked ready to choose. The word hung heavy in the air. Choose. As if this land wasn't already sewn into her bones. Della didn't ride to the front gate. Not yet. Instead, she rode ashfall along the back of the property, tracing the creek that carved through the pasture like a memory. The wind danced in the grass. The trees whispered stories only she could hear. Her mother had once galloped through these fields, belly round with a child, hair wild in the wind. That story, one she'd only heard secondhand, now felt real. It was more than her father's legacy. It was her mother's too. At sunset, Della stood beside the barn and stared across the empty corral. If I stay, she whispered to Ashfall, it won't be for him. It'll be for her. For us. The horse nickered gently, lowering his head beside her. He understood. Far across the pasture, the porch light flickered on. Harlan Voss sat in that same old chair, watching the land he once ruled alone, and now for the first time, didn't anymore. It was a crisp Saturday morning when Della Ray walked back into the auction barn. The same place where everything had cracked open. The sawdust smell was still there. So was the leather. But something had changed. The floor had been swept. The busted rails had been replaced. A faded banner still read Voss Livestock Auction, but the people in the stands weren't looking at the name anymore. They were looking at her. Della didn't flinch. She wore her mother's old denim jacket, a clean white shirt, and the expression of someone who owed no one an apology. Ashfall stood beside her, reins loose in her hand, coat shining in the morning light. He walked like he belonged there now, like he had nothing left to prove. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't boo, but they came. That meant something. Today, Della said, her voice strong. I didn't call this gathering for business. I called it to tell you what's changing. A few murmurs flickered through the seats. My name is Della Ray Winslow. Some of you knew my mother. Most of you didn't care to. But you'll know me. I'm not here to erase the past. I'm here to build something honest from it. She let the words settle before she continued. This barn, this ranch, they weren't just built on cattle and pride. They were built on silence. On secrets that ends now. She turned to Ashfall, her hand gently resting on his neck. He was thrown away, just like I was. But we're still standing, and we're not going anywhere. The last words echoed against the old wood, sharper than applause. In the back, Irene Kavanaugh dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Boone gave a quiet nod. Even Merle Thatcher, grizzled and closed off, uncrossed his arms. Harlan Voss didn't speak. He stood near the post where he'd once presided like a king. Now his jaw was tight, but something inside him had softened. Not pride, not shame, something quieter. Acceptance. Della turned, leading Ashfall out of the ring, walking not like a girl proving herself, but like a storm that had passed. She didn't need applause. She didn't want validation. What she carried was heavier than either. She carried presence. And for the first time in her life, the land, the people, and the silence all made room for her. Underscore, 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 underscore,
Sure, Bellis.
One she carried was heavier than either. She carried presence. And for carried present, wonder came was Selev to Pear Creek like a long exhale. People began to nod when they saw her. A few asked about Ashfall. The barn, once a battleground, became a place of healing. Della spent her mornings in the pasture, saddle in hand, Ashfall always the first to greet her, chestnut coat gleaming like fire in the early mist. They moved together in rhythm, like the land had been waiting for them to return. One morning, Harlan stood by the fence line. He didn't wave, didn't speak at first, but he waited, and waiting, she'd learned, was its own kind of gesture. She approached slowly, Ashfall grazing nearby. "I've been thinking," he said, eyes fixed on the horizon. "About your mama. About how many years I wasted thinking I could outrun the parts of me I didn't want to face." She said nothing. Let him speak. "I never thought I'd get the chance to be anything to you. But if there's space someday, I'd like to try. Even if it's just fixing a fence now and then." Della looked at him. Really looked. The pride was still there, tucked beneath the gravel and wear, but it had softened. A man not trying to be right anymore, just trying to be present. She gave a slow nod. "Then show up," she said simply. That afternoon, Della sat on the porch where Elise Ray had once stood dreaming of a life that never came. The field stretched wide before her, golden and full. Ashfall grazed nearby, peaceful. Finally home. The wind carried the scent of hay, of horses, of memory, but not regret. Not anymore. For the first time in her life, Fair Creek didn't feel like a place tied to pain. It felt like something she had chosen. It felt like belonging.